We're back on the record, and I see Mr. Shoemaker is sitting on the stand, and Mr. Manti is ready to go, so let's go ahead with your opportunity to talk.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Shoemaker, in going through your CV, my understanding is that you received a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree in graphic design in 1985, am I right?
Yes.
And as far as additional degrees or anything like that, that is the end of it, am I right?
There's always ongoing education, and I've been educated beyond the college degree.
I understand, but nothing in terms of graduate or postgraduate work that resulted in a degree?
No.
Okay. And nothing, sort of, you're not being held out as anything like an engineer or physicist or anything like that, am I right?
Correct.
Okay. Graphic design, essentially you take computer software and, for lack of a more specific way to put it, you draw things or create things.
That's one version.
Okay. What's another?
There's a lot of different types of design, information design. There's a lot of different things that you can do with those tools.
All right. As far as your prior experience in testifying, I think you said 20 criminal actual cases where you were appeared in court?
Declaration or testified.
Okay, I want to know specifically where you testified in a court in a criminal trial in front of a jury. How many?
17.
17. How many of those was your testimony ever even really objected to or challenged at any kind of pretrial hearing or anything?
You mean challenged, or what do you mean?
How many times did whatever side you were testifying for, and I understand it's always been for the defense, but how many times did the other side challenge or object to you being permitted to testify?
Whenever I was qualified as an expert.
So there was always some kind of pretrial hearing?
Whenever I've testified in court, there's always been a pretrial hearing.
Okay. So 17 times. And how many of those involved animations created with the motion capture suits?
Probably about a dozen.
A dozen? Can you tell me the last one? Give me the title of it.
It was Green, I believe it's People versus Green in Placer, or Auburn County, I believe. Or, yeah, it was in Placer City, or Placerville, sorry.
Placerville?
Yes.
I know that you have also testified that you often create these animations based upon such things as surveillance footage, like you showed us the one with in the parking lot and that sort of thing. How many of these involved a situation like this one where you had no film or anything like that and you were basically inserting figures?
It's very rare that I have film to be able to match the animation to the film.
Okay.
So that was pretty much the only one where I've done the matching onto a security camera.
How many of these then did you involve figures that are actually in what I'll call, just term a melee or a fight between the two of them? How many times have you done that in court in front of a jury?
Twice.
Twice?
That includes this one.
That includes this one?
Most of them are, they're not person-on-person fights. Most of them are shootings. It's mostly just shootings.
As I understand it, most of what you did in these other cases are the animations that you create are you take bullet trajectories that you can, physically measure and implant those or embed those into your animations and illustrate them. I think there's a few I've read about where you use a red line or something like that to show how it goes, right?
Essentially, yes.
Okay, so you're taking the raw data, just like you use total station data here, and you're drawing lines or putting figures in places where they could have been, but not like this case where you're describing a physical ongoing fluid situation between two people.
There's some that I've worked on where it's multiple gunshots. So you've got movement from the first one to the next one to the next one. So it's a sequence of events.
Okay, but not interaction between the two physically. You're talking about measuring trajectories again and things like that.
Correct.
Okay. So what is that last one, or the only time that you've actually testified in court in a scenario similar to this one? Tell me when and where that was.
The last one using the suit, or?
Using the suit, involving more than just, involving a physical fight between two or more people where you've had to recapture a fluid situation in court in front of a jury.
That was the Greenberg.
Greenberg, okay. And tell me a little bit about that one.
That one was an ex-police officer came up to a vehicle and shot the person that was in the vehicle. So I had to determine the position of each of them and their positioning when he was shot, their movements.
Okay, so that involved, again, some distance between the two of them and a shooting? One inside a car and one outside a car, something like that?
Close approximation to each other, yes.
Okay, but one sitting in a car, and I think you said one shooting into the car from outside, is that?
He was within the door, open door of the
Okay.
truck.
Okay, not as in this case where you're trying to describe a ongoing scrum between two or more people.
Correct.
Okay, so this would be the
I
first
have
time.
one that I'm currently working on now that, not this one. There's one I'm working on now that is the same as that.
I know about working on. I want to just focus right now for the moment on things where your testimony has been accepted for court purposes in front of a jury in a criminal case. And it sounds to me, if I'm not mistaken, like this would be the first time this particular scenario has arisen where you've been called upon to do that in court in front of a jury.
The suit that I've used has been accepted in court in 2 other cases.
I'm not just talking
That I
about the
worked
suit.
on.
I'm talking about all the variables that we've just mentioned, where you're using the suit, inserting figures that are physically interacting with one another in a rolling fight in court in a criminal case in front of a jury. This would be the first time, right?
With this close contact, yes.
Okay. And I think you said, at least according to your CV, you're actually the only company in the country using the wireless motion capture suits for reconstruction purposes.
Correct.
So there's no issue about whether your peers or fellows in the industry are doing the same thing for this kind of thing. You're the only guy who does this that has those, right?
Correct. There's a limited number of, the company that makes the suit differentiates it from all the other suits that are available.
And while I think I understood you to say that you are you know how to use the software, you don't know anything about the inner workings or the algorithms. You're not a code writer or software engineer or anything like that, am I right?
Correct.
Okay. So if the program were not working properly, unless it shut down completely or started giving you crazy results, you wouldn't necessarily know that, would you?
I verify whether it's operating correctly or not.
Okay.
It's been calibrated at the factory, and also every single time that I use it, I calibrate it myself.
Let me go to the suits in particular. In this case, what you did is you got the raw data, I think you said, from the total station, then you went out to the scene and you did your mapping thing, and then you put 2 people in suits, right?
Correct.
Okay. And out there at the scene, basically you told them what to do, right?
According to, yes.
Okay. Who were these people? Were they male or female?
2 males.
How big were they?
They were relative size to Mr. Martin and Mr. Zimmerman.
How tall were they and how much did they weigh?
The one who represented Mr. Zimmerman was, I believe he was about 5'8".
Okay.
The person that was representing Mr. Zimmerman was,
So Mr. Martin?
or Mr. Martin, sorry,
Okay.
was approximately 5'11".
approximately?
5'11" or 6 foot.
Do,
It's not really that important for the person that's wearing the suit to be the exact size of the person that you're doing the movements for.
all I want to know is, do you even know exactly how big they were? Did you measure these people?
He was 5'11".
How do you know that?
I'm 6 foot. He was virtually the same size as
So
I
you did
was.
an eyeball estimate based on him standing there near you?
That's all that was necessary.
How much did they weigh?
That wasn't relevant for the reconstruction of it.
Is that a, do you know or not? I mean, I'm just asking.
They were similar stature to the people that I was representing with the motion capture suits, to Mr. Zimmerman and Mr. Martin.
How long were their arms and legs?
Average size.
Does that mean you did not measure them?
I didn't measure their arms.
Okay. And they got into poses, as I understand it, what the suits do is they give off pulses of energy, whether it's light or whatever it is, that are documented by these cameras that you set up. Is that how they basically work?
No, that's not the way mine.
Tell me how they work.
Mine has 16 accelerometers, and just like your iPhone, when you move it, it will register the movement. So with these 16 accelerometers, they send a wireless signal to my laptop, which has antennas that accept the signal. Then they take that and they apply it to a figure represented on the laptop.
They meaning what does? You said they take the signal. What takes the signal?
The antennas that come in go into the software, and it's applied to the character
And
that's
the
in the
pulses
computer.
given off by the accelerometers, are they,
The pulses from the accelerometers, it goes into, there's two transmitters that fit on the back of the suit, and those send the signal to the laptop.
so does each accelerometer have its own sort of unique code or pulse?
Yes,
Okay. And when you're rapidly moving around, are you telling me that you can differentiate or that the antenna differentiate among each of them?
yes.
Okay.
And you also have a green light to make sure whether it's functioning properly or not,
Whether what is?
or whether each of those accelerometers are functioning and sending a signal properly.
The version of this animation that you played for the court this morning, is that the final version now?
Yes?
Okay. How many prior final versions of this have there been? In other words, how many have you tendered and then had to change again?
There was 2 prior versions, and they were adjusted for more accuracy
Okay.
according to the witnesses.
Well, and that's sort of where I want to get to, is you actually never, you adjusted based on witnesses. You haven't actually ever read or listened to the actual testimony from the witnesses, have you?
There's police reports that,
Courtroom testimony, not police reports.
not the courtroom testimony, no.
In fact, what you did is you changed them based upon what Mr. Zimmerman's attorneys told you people said in court.
Yes.
Okay. And that actually apparently was different enough from the way you'd originally created the animation that you have changed it at least twice.
Just to be more accurate, yes.
Okay. Do I understand that most of what you do is, when you say reconstruct a crime scene, you take known points, things that are mapped and known and static in their position, shell casings, trees, sidewalks, that sort of thing. And that is reconstructing a crime scene. When you start adding figures and animation to it, what are you doing?
That's also creating the crime scene. What I do is I take coroner's reports, all the discovery, specifics about the scene, total station data, if it's available, my gathering of data, and I put it into context. Sometimes when a jury receives, say, a coroner's report, for example, and they talk about the angle of a bullet trajectory, the jury doesn't, they get that angle, but they don't really know how that applies to the scene or how is that relevant and what position they would be in the scene. So what I do is I take all the different aspects of the case and put it into context.
All right. Exactly which pieces of evidence, let me rephrase that. Exactly which testimony did you incorporate into this animation?
There was Jeremy Weinberg's.
Did Jeremy Weinberg testify in court to your knowledge?
Are you talking about testimony, or are you
Yes,
talking
sir.
about police reports or
Specifically
discovery?
testimony. I understand you had available to you a bunch of stuff. I want to know what actual evidence, courtroom testimony, was incorporated into this animation.
It was Jennifer Lauer's testimony, John Good's testimony, and Selma Mora, I believe, her testimony.
You show in this animation an initial contact between two figures, represented, I assume, to be Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman, right?
Correct.
And whose testimony did you use to describe that initial, to depict that initial encounter?
Part of it is off of the, from the discovery that you gave us was,
I'm sorry, maybe I wasn't clear. Whose testimony did you use?
oh, testimony?
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, maybe you could clarify, is he talking about trial testimony or just pretrial testimony?
Well, I think that it has to be consistent with testimony or evidence presented at trial.
Certainly,
Is
and
what
of
the
course,
case
all
law
of,
says.
But
and all of
assume,
Mrs. Zimmerman's statements are in trial, so if the
Well,
witness is aware of that, it would
Well,
help.
the witness could testify what he used, and that's what the
I
question
think he was
is.
confused by trial testimony.
Okay, well, I'll go ahead, please let me finish. It has to be trial testimony or evidence, so the question to you is, what trial testimony and or evidence did you use to incorporate into your animation?
For the initial contact, it was Jennifer Lauer's statement.
according to what you understand her statement to be, you believe that she saw that occur?
She didn't see it occur, she heard it occur.
Okay.
That was the point.
You are, however, depicting it visually, right?
Correct.
Okay. She certainly didn't testify that she could depict it visually, right?
She just pinpointed the initial contact point, where it started.
She pinpointed it
At the T intersection to the left of where she was in the condo.
somewhere to the left of her condo is where she first heard things, correct?
Correct.
Did she ever say that it must have started there? Not mine. Mine's here.
It was on vibrate, and it's not vibrating anymore, but it's not yours. Okay, go
No,
ahead.
Your Honor. Oh, I'm sorry. Your indication is that she, according to you, somehow testified that she knows that it must have started there?
I have a question.
If you want a clarification, you can ask Mr. Manti what you
Okay.
want clarified.
So for evidence, which the judge was asking, does that include police reports?
No, sir. I want you to assume that anytime I'm asking you about actual evidence or testimony, I mean something that has gone on in this courtroom during trial, okay?
Okay.
What someone said outside of court, for right now, I want you to assume that that is not evidence, okay?
Your Honor, that's what I was trying to clear up earlier. It may not be as to Ms. Lauer, but the witnesses got to identify, you got to understand what's in trial. And if we
Okay,
can
I will
put-
explain that to him, but I don't want you,
Try
by
not
your
to- try not to
objection,
push it.
by your objection, trying to infer to this witness how he should answer.
Exactly.
So, it would be anything heard by the jury in this courtroom, either heard or seen, by way of testimony or evidence introduced. That's what he means
Well,
by
I'm
a
not
trial.
sure what that is because I was not allowed to watch the trial, so,
Well, then that's your answer.
okay.
So then if I were to ask you, does this animation accurately show what has been testified to in this trial, is your answer you don't know?
I'm not sure what the proceedings, what went on in court.
Okay,
So, according to the evidence that I've received and from your office,
well, I'm not talking about the discovery matters and all the stuff that you used initially for the first set of animations or the underlying stuff, and I'm not talking about what a lawyer may have told you. If I were to ask you, does this animation accurately show what has been testified to in evidence in this courtroom, is your answer, you don't know? And again, I'm not,
my answer to that would be yes.
your
If
answer is,
it's, if it's not in my consultations with the attorneys, it would have changed. So it's been adjusted to testimony in court.
none of which you have heard or observed yourself,
Correct.
and none of which evidence you have actually seen yourself.
None of the evidence which has been in court, yes.
Okay. So, part of this animation shows this initial encounter where these two figures kind of walk up to each other. And I understand you believe that the victim in this case, Trayvon Martin, was left-handed. Am I right? You said that?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. And you don't show anybody jumping out of a bush, for example. No?
There was no evidence to support that.
Nothing. Okay. And you don't show anybody just sort of emerging out of the darkness or running out of the darkness. It's just these two people kind of walk up to each other and stand face to face for a while, right?
For seconds, yes.
Okay. The animation also, you do show and plot the location of various items, cell phones, flashlights, sprinkler boxes, right?
Correct.
And sprinkler heads,
Yes.
right? Couple trees,
Yes.
all right? And that's sort of in almost a 40-foot swath along that sloped ground that you've described, right?
Correct.
Okay. However, the animation I saw kind of just takes a big white arrow from the point of that initial walk-up encounter and zooms to a place 40 feet away where essentially we then start to show the two figures bound up together, right?
Correct.
And the reason for that is,
Is
what, did they get
because
teleported or what?
that just shows the direction of Mr. Martin and Mr. Zimmerman, consistent with witness testimony or witness reports, police reports, and with the trail of evidence going down that direction.
Okay. The trail of evidence, you'd agree with me, is just a trail. It by itself doesn't have a direction, right? In other words, whether it's going left to right or right to left as you're looking at it, the place where things are found doesn't independently have a direction until you start bringing in what other people have said about how it happened, right?
Correct.
Okay.
The reason for the arrow is moving from the one witnessed event down to the next witnessed event. I
Okay.
didn't add anything in between there in terms of movements of the figures.
Because the animation cannot show it because you have no idea how it actually happened, right?
Correct.
Okay. Now, when we get to where the figures again reemerge, you have a figure that you show to be, I guess, represented to be witness John Good, right?
Correct.
How tall is John Good?
6 foot.
And you know this how?
I was given that information from the attorneys.
Okay, so again, not from anything that came out in court, but from the attorneys?
Yes, who got it from Mr. Good?
Okay. And where was he standing?
There's a sliding glass door, and the right side slides over. He was on the right side of the sliding glass door, the right door, about a foot out from the door.
About a foot? And where do you get that from?
Mr. Good.
From Mr. Good's in-court testimony?
From consultation with the attorneys.
Okay. And as far as where on the patio he's standing, did you just pick a spot where you put the figure?
It's just straight out from the door, 1 foot.
So you don't know whether he stood to the left of the door, to the right of the door, straight out from the door, wherever. You just picked a spot.
I didn't pick it. That's where said he was standing.
Where he said he was standing when he was here in court?
Through consultation with the attorney.
Okay. Was that before court?
I'm not sure when it
You
was.
have no idea.
It was during trial, but I'm not sure when.
Okay. And he told you exactly where on the patio Mr. Good was standing?
Yes.
Okay. That patio is how big by how big?
I don't have the exact measurements. I believe it's there's 2 pillars on the corner, and I believe it's about 7.5 feet from one pillar to the other pillar.
Did he tell you he was standing within 1 foot of this pillar or 1 foot of this pillar?
He
Or
told
anything
me he
like
was
that?
standing 1 foot straight out from the one door, which is where I placed him.
1 foot.
Yes.
All right. Let me start with something else about the animation. It is true, is it not, that, and I should rephrase that, I'm not really starting. It is true, is it not, that the animation actually contains artificial light? In other
Correct.
words, okay, so it purports to show things even though you know it was dark outside.
Correct.
Okay. And my understanding is that you made intentionally no effort whatsoever to accurately document the lighting conditions and everything else.
Because the most important thing with the video is
Is that a yes or a
seeing
no?
detail. Yes.
Okay. So the most important thing on the video is seeing detail, even though you know that that wouldn't have been the detail that night.
Correct. There's plenty of other people can testify to the lighting conditions.
Okay, so if I were to ask you if the lighting conditions portrayed on that animation are an accurate representation of what they were that night, you would say no.
You're correct.
Okay.
I would say no.
And in your decision about where to place the people, now your decision about where to instruct the people who were wearing the suits to go and what positions to assume, that was all done months before any in-court testimony, right?
Not months. It was probably within the month before.
Okay, within a month before, but certainly prior to any trial proceedings.
Correct.
Okay. And you told them based on your best estimates as to what materials you'd been provided by the defense attorney.
Based on the police reports
Okay.
and the interviews, yes.
Right. And how many interviews did you actually read?
There was Jennifer Lowers and John Goods. There's a couple, there's 3 handwritten reports.
Handwritten, like witness statements, you mean?
Yes.
Okay. And that's it?
Yes.
Okay. So based on those, you told these people wearing the suits where to go and what to do.
Based on that, plus based on the 911 call,
Okay.
and timed it with the 911
Well,
call.
let me get into that. The 911 call is actually placed by Jenna Lauer, correct?
Correct.
Jenna Lauer saw none of this, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Yet you build into, and John Good, from whose perspective a lot of this is shown, was not on the phone with 911 at the time, right?
Correct.
Nonetheless, you take Jenna Lauer's 911 call and show figures doing certain actions at certain points in that 911 call, right?
Correct.
Now, I understand why you might be able to pinpoint the gunshot in the 911 call, right?
Right.
But as far as any of the rest of it, do you have any idea where those figures were actually at any point in the audio of the 911 call and what they were doing?
The only figure other than Mr. Zimmerman and Mr. Martin is Mr. Good.
I'm sorry, I'm talking about Mr. Zimmerman and Mr.
I
Martin.
think he was in the middle of explaining the answer. I request he be allowed to.
Were you finished with your answer?
No.
Okay, you may finish your answer.
Who specified when he came in during the phone call, during the 911 call. On the video, he specified when he came in, how long he was out there, and when he went back in.
I'm sorry, on what video did Mr. Good say that he came in during a specific point of Jenna Lauer's 911 call?
That was through consultation with the attorneys, his modification, adjustments of the video and its placement.
I'm sorry. Are you telling this court that you were told that John Good stated exactly where he was during portions of Jenna Lauer's 911 call?
How long he was outside?
Okay, not how long he was outside. I want to know, you have matched specific audio from that phone call to specific actions both by John Good and the two figures on the ground, right?
Correct.
And what I want to know is what in-court testimony or evidence you were actually provided that tells you John Good saw two figures doing X at the time Jenna Lauer was saying Y.
There's not any in-court testimony on it.
There's not any out-of-court testimony about it either, is there?
There's consultation with the attorneys on how long he was out there, when he went back in, and when he came out.
Okay, and this is, so again, you're integrating the visual perspective of one witness who's has no idea what Jenna Lauer, right? John Good has no idea what Jenna Lauer might be doing because they're not even in the same house, right?
It's not just based on Jenna Lauer's call, which he couldn't hear at the time, but he can base it on when the gunshot went off.
Well, I understand when the gunshot went off. But what you're telling this court is prior to the gunshot going off, or even afterwards, but certainly prior to the gunshot going off, that John Good, visual witness, and Jenna Lauer, audio witness, neither of whom know anything about what the other's doing at the time, that you can somehow match up exactly what John Good is seeing at the exact moment Jenna Lauer is saying something?
If you take the 911 call where the gunshot went off, and if Mr. Good said that he was in the condo a particular time before the gunshot, you have a point when he went into the condo. He has a particular time of how long he was out there. So if you backtrack from the gunshot, you can determine from those when he came out and when he went back in.
Those times, of course, are absolutely not exact. Those were all complete estimations, correct? Right? I mean, John Good never said, I got a stopwatch and I can tell you 30 seconds before the gunshot I went inside. Nothing like that, right?
It's an estimation on his part,
In
correct?
fact, okay, and therefore it is also just nothing more than an estimation on your part. I mean, you can only put in...
This is based on a witness that was there that said how long he was out there
Okay,
and how long it was
Here's what I want-
before the gunshot went off.
here's what I want to focus on, sir, is that animation is very specific. You play a portion of that audio recording in conjunction with supposed actual video or simulated video from John Good's perspective, all based on nothing more than estimations.
By the person that was witnessing it.
Okay. And therefore, by you as well, because you can only put in what you've got to work with, right?
Correct.
Okay. So none of that could be said to be exact or accurate to the point that you can say for certain that that's what he was seeing at the time Jenna Lauer was saying a certain word. Right?
I don't think it has to be specific to the exact word that she was saying.
Well, your animation, though, makes it very specific, doesn't it?
Yes.
There's nothing in that animation that tells me the call is generally going on now, and I'm not sure exactly what part this is. That animation shows exactly and sounds exactly that these things are going on at the same time, right?
Correct. This is a scenario according to witness and evidence.
I'm sorry. Which witness and which evidence that came out in court? Or are we back to estimations based on what attorneys told you?
Consultation with attorneys
Okay.
on his movements.
Would you agree with me that there's no way John Good could ever say, at the time Jenna Lauer was saying this, I was doing this?
I don't think that's what he based his
I'm not
time for
asking.
being out there.
I'm not asking what you
He
think.
can't say exactly according to what she was saying.
And in fact, he was gone from any visual view while Jenna Lauer is still on the phone and for a period of time before that gunshot ever happens.
Seconds.
Okay?
That's
But
not
no
a
one
period.
knows, no one has clocked exactly how many seconds that might be because nobody had a stopwatch on it, right?
Correct.
Okay. Nonetheless, that animation purports to show it, right?
Yes.
So is the animation purporting to be more accurate than we know the evidence really can be?
The purpose of him involved in the animation isn't so much whether he was outside for 10 seconds versus 7 seconds. It's putting him into the location and showing what he was able to see at that time.
Well, but you don't know what he was able to see at that time because you don't know exactly what was going on with the call, right?
His estimation is based not on the call, but on when the gunshot went off.
It is estimation.
They're overlapping.
It is estimation upon estimation upon estimation. So when I ask you if that animation purports to show more exactness, more accuracy than the actual witness testimony and evidence, would you agree with me?
I can only do it to the point of the witness.
I understand there are limitations to the animations. What I'm trying to get is this was created, but you're not pretending that it's an accurate depiction of what went on. You're positing it as an estimation, right?
According to the witness that was involved.
Whom you've never actually heard testify.
Correct.
Okay. You would agree with me, too, that there is a point in time where Mr. Good is not seeing anything, but you still show things going on in the animation as though we were looking from his perspective, right?
You'd have to be specific on what point.
Okay, there's a point where the figure that represents John Good turns and exits stage left.
Correct.
Nonetheless, we're still treated to a view of two figures on the ground.
Correct.
What witness testimony are you relying on for your depiction of those figures and what they're doing at the time, since John Good is no longer there?
That was based on Mr. DeMaio's positioning of Mr. Zimmerman and Mr. Martin.
You didn't hear him testify today either, did you?
That was in consultation with the doctor.
Okay. And that conversation was a 20-minute phone call last Saturday, correct?
Yes,
And that was after you had actually been deposed twice and thought you were done making changes to the animation, right?
correct. That was the first time I was able to talk to him.
And you changed it, you had that conversation because you were asked to call him, right?
I wasn't asked to call him, no. I asked about the doctor. They said he was standing by for me to talk to him, and so I talked to
It
him.
wasn't your idea to make yet another animation after you'd been deposed twice and said you were done until you were set up with speaking with this doctor, right?
No, it was my idea from the start that we needed physical evidence of the positioning when the shot went off.
And are you saying that the current animation is based on physical evidence?
Based on the evidence or the testimony,
I'm sorry,
a consultation with Dr. DeMaio.
difference. It's not based on the testimony as far as you know. It's actually based on your 20-minute phone call to the man on Saturday, right?
Correct.
Okay. And I think you also told me yesterday that the one thing you know for sure is that the entry of the bullet wound, again, based upon that phone call, was directly 90 degrees straight on, right?
Correct.
And that's why you have the figures at the end of that animation, or I'm sorry, not at the end, but in what I'll call position 3, or third position as you've labeled it. You tell me that they're at a 90, they're parallel to one another, right?
They're horizontal to each other, yes.
Okay, and not only horizontal, but parallel, because that's how you show them in the animation, right?
Yes.
Okay. So virtually stacked on top of one another, like Lego blocks or something.
No, there's
No?
space between them.
And that space is based on what?
It's based on talking to my conversation with Dr. DeMaio, and also in creation of the scene to be able to fit the characters together.
How big is that space?
From where? Between
Between
the
two
one
bodies.
person and the other?
Sure, between the two bodies. How big is that space between those two people who are parallel?
Between the clothing or between their bodies?
Well, let's start with between the clothing.
It varies. In my third position, I'm not quite sure. I haven't measured between the two bodies, but from the ground, it's approximately 13 to 15 inches.
Approximately? And you haven't measured between the two bodies?
That wasn't the purpose of the final positioning. The purpose of the final positioning is to show who's on top and who's on the bottom.
The purpose of and I'm not talking about the final positioning, I'm talking about third position now.
Correct.
And the purpose of that is to try to create something that resembles the defense theory. I understand that, right?
Not to resemble what the defense theory is,
Is it to resemble some other theory?
Dr. DeMaio's, his positioning of them.
Okay. Based upon your 20-minute phone call to him.
It doesn't take long, yes.
And he told you that they were X inches away apart from each other and at X angle to one another?
The positioning of Mr. Martin bent over Mr. Zimmerman.
Is that a yes, that he told you exact distances, or is that a no?
The distance varies according to what my conversation with him was. It can vary between 2 inches in one spot for the clothing and 4 inches in another.
Well, that's distance between the clothing and the gunshot wound to the chest of the person who got shot, right?
Correct.
Have I asked you about that space yet, or that measurement?
Well, that will depend on positioning
And
of
all
the
of that
person on
stuff,
top.
I'm sorry, were you finished?
Yes.
All of that stuff varies, as you said, is estimations, right?
Yes, but in this particular positioning of their particular positioning, the purpose of their positioning wasn't to get so specific that you could measure and that you could have a camera there measuring exactly the distance between them and show that point of view. Otherwise, I would have put a camera there to show that point of view. The purpose of it was to show who is on the top and who is on the bottom.
So the purpose of it is not to be accurate as it actually happened, it is simply to show positions of figures?
Correct. Otherwise, I would have put the camera at another location
So-
to be more specific on it.
So do you know whether that animation accurately depicts how those figures were in relation to one another that night?
Yes, according to Dr. DeMaio, that's the position that they're in, which is consistent with his findings.
That position being parallel to one another with an unknown distance
They're
between.
not completely parallel in the third view.
I'll let the animation speak for itself. So if I were to ask you, are you basing this on your phone conversation with Dr. DeMaio or his actual in-court testimony about the possible positions of these people? You would say it was the phone call.
Yes.
Okay. I think you said earlier that sometimes when you measure bullet trajectories, especially as it goes into bodies, you use a metal rod of some sort.
I create a rod in the computer.
Did you do that in this case?
I wasn't showing the bullet trajectory in this.
So, and in fact, that animation doesn't show the bullet trajectory, the firearm, or anything like that, does it?
That wasn't the purpose of the animation.
I understand, but it doesn't show any of those things, does it?
No.
And in fact, you were actually specifically asked to leave the gun out of the animation, weren't you?
No.
Did you ever tell me you were?
I don't believe I was told.
Page 27 of last Wednesday's deposition, counsel. Okay. This would be deposition number 2. May I approach you now?
Yes, you may.
Mr. Shoemaker, do you remember talking to me? I guess it would have been last Wednesday. That would have been your second deposition in the case. You were still in California? at
Yes.
that time?
Yes, I did.
All right. I'm going to show you here, page 27, and I'm going to begin at line 4. you see that question answer?
Correct. It wasn't a,
Go ahead.
I don't believe it states that I was told to leave it out. It says in consultation with the attorney.
Do you remember the question, were you requested to leave the gun out, or did you make that decision on your own? And your answer was, I didn't make that decision on my own. I believe it was just consultation with the attorneys. Remember
Yes.
that question answer?
It was in consultation with them. So
Okay.
my input and the attorney's input.
So you specifically
That's-
decided not to put the gun in.
That's not the purpose of this video.
Is that a yes or a no?
I did not put it in.
Even though you certainly knew that that gun was there that night.
Correct.
Okay. So the video omits that.
Correct, because that's not the purpose of the video.
The conditions in which you filmed these folks in the suit.
You mean recorded?
Right. I'm going to start with just, you filmed them, I assume, outside in the daytime, rolling around so you could see things, right?
Recorded them, yes.
Okay. And
Not
did,
filmed.
when you recorded them, I mean, obviously, well, maybe not obviously, let me ask it this way. Were these folks moving in a rapid pace as though they were actually fighting one another, or were they getting up, assuming a pose, and then waiting for your direction to get up, go and assume the next one?
Let me object, Your Honor, to this and the relevance. Though they were moving in previous, may I speak to the objection? No, to this
Yeah,
matter.
your jury's not here, it's
Okay.
fine.
While in previous animations, we had movement, hands swinging and things like that, in response to some concerns about the state, we actually eliminated all of that. So as I mentioned to the court, and as you've seen, they are individual frame videos, so question of animation, of movement, is no longer relevant for the court's consideration. That's my purpose of a relevancy objection.
Can you clarify that?
Well, I would beg to differ because, of course, the very first part of that animation most assuredly contains movement.
Absolutely, but I think what we're talking about was the part where they were moving from that location down. That was,
Well, clarify what your question
Very
is,
well.
please.
Any point in the video, all right, the animation, when you are reproducing and filming the motion capture suits in action, right?
Yes,
Whether it's the first interaction between these people, the subsequent positioning of the bodies, any of that, okay?
yes.
And I know that at least some of that motion is still on this animation, right?
The initial movement.
Okay. Talk to me about the conditions in which that was filmed. I assume it, for example, was filmed in the daytime.
Correct,
Okay. I assumed it wasn't raining.
correct,
The grass wasn't slick.
correct.
Okay. There weren't these other items of physical evidence out there.
Correct.
Okay. You didn't, did you go out ahead of time and place markers down where you knew the items would have been according to the measurements that you'd received ahead of the filming?
We measured the areas from the drain boxes and the sprinkler boxes to get the correct position.
Who told you what distance the bodies were from the drain boxes and the sprinkler boxes?
Placement of their position was based on the shell casing, position of the shell casing, position of Mr. Martin's cell phone, and where it was in relation to Mr. Good's condominium.
Okay, so I guess let me ask you like this. Going to be couple different types of questions. First, when you're filming this motion, this interaction between these people, are you trying to go to the exact location where you believe it happened based upon the testimony, or are you just filming this in action and then later on you plug that stuff into wherever you want to on the animation?
It's best to record it when you're on the scene, to record it in that location, because you can interact with like the slope of the grass and other elements. But Once that's on the scene, and the scene is created in the computer, then you can take that, drop it into the scene, and adjust it so that it's most accurate.
So when you were at the scene, you hadn't already, for example, measured exactly where the shell casing was and like put a dot, or had you?
We laid out little markers.
You did
showing
lay out
where they were.
markers. Okay. Now, do I understand then, in this, the second part, or second series of questions, you then just took the figures and put them in exact locations vis-a-vis things like the shell casing and the porch. In other words, say, for example, 6 feet from the porch and 3 feet from the shell casing. You put the figures in a specific place, right?
Correct.
And you did that based on what evidence and testimony as to the exact location of the figures?
Are you talking about the ones straight out from Mr. Good's condominium? All the still figures from that? Those
Well-
were placed there based on Mr. Good's testimony and in consultation with the attorneys.
Okay, let me talk about position 3, for example. My understanding is that you placed the figures where they were in the third position based upon your belief as to, your knowledge of the location where the shell casing was found and your belief as to the ejection of the shell casing from that firearm that's not in the video, right?
Correct.
Okay.
That's one. And relative to the position where Mr. Zimmerman was found,
You mean Mr. Moore?
or Mr. Martin, sorry.
Okay, but that's position 4, right?
Correct.
All right.
But
Position
3 is
I'm gonna stick-
relative to 4.
Okay, I'm going to stick to 3 for the moment, all right? You said that you put the figures in a certain position relative to the shell casing. Now, to my knowledge, no one testified about being this close to the shell casing. So is this an estimation on your part based upon you thinking that the gun must have ejected to the right and the shell casing must have gone X distance?
Correct. It's just in proximity to the shell casing so that the shell casing is on the right of Mr. Zimmerman.
On the right, but in other words, 2 feet to the right, 3 feet to the right, 4 feet to the right, you really have no idea exactly how far that would be.
It can't be that far away from where Mr. Martin ended up. So the proximity of evidence marker number 6 has to be pretty close proximity to the third position.
I understand generalized proximity. What I'm getting at is, would you agree with me that how high the gun is up off the ground might affect how far that shell casing goes and therefore where it lands?
There's a lot of variables that could have,
A lot of variables. So again,
Not-
we're
innumerable variables, but
none of those variables for which you had actual direct evidence, right?
just that a shell casing ejects from the right on a
So
9mm.
you just found it. We know where it was found, but we have no idea where it came from. We know where it landed, not where it took off.
We know approximately where it came from.
I'm asking, your animation shows these figures in a very specific spot. What I'm just asking you is that an estimation based upon your estimation about how the shell casing got there?
It's based on their last position and based on their previous position and based on their last position and based also on the shell casing, location of the shell casing.
The last position, the fourth position,
Correct.
is what happened after the defendant claims that he shot Trayvon Martin, that Trayvon Martin fell off him, that he then jumped on Trayvon Martin's back and moved a portion of his body, right?
Correct.
And we have absolutely no idea exactly how far that happened. We just know where the body ended up being found, right?
It's in close proximity to the final
I
position.
understand it's all in proximity. This whole thing happened within a 40 square foot
You're
area.
not really giving me specifics. Are you talking 5 feet from where I have them? Are you talking 3 inches from where they are, or?
Well, what I'm asking you is, why does your animation give me those specifics?
Because it's to the one side of the shell casing, it's to the other side is the cell phone position, plus their previous position is just up the slope from their third position.
If I'm, the animation itself is based on a series of estimations.
Can I interrupt you for just 1 minute?
Yes, sir.
I saw that animation one brief moment from a computer, and although I remember generally the things that you're talking about, but specifically positions and stuff, it would be helpful to me if we had the animation up and you had him explain the positions that you're talking about, because
Do you have your laptop still there with you, sir?
have we figured out a way to
I
put it up?
think we can get one of the several computers that has that animation on it to work now.
Okay,
So if we
can
take
can we
about 2
please do
minutes.
that, because I'm really trying to follow the testimony, and without looking specifically at each figure or position you're talking about, 3 and 4, it would be helpful to the court if I had that in conjunction with the testimony.
Sure.
So can we try to do that?